here is a model of Archaeopteryx, the evolutionary link between birds and dinosaurs.
Evolution is the glue that makes biology make sense.
So I've been coming to this museum ever since I was little, mostly because I love evolution, biology, paleontology, but today I'm here more to explore the systems of the evolutionary trees, and yeah, here we are. Let's go explore the way that people organize knowledge itself. As I walk through the Hall of Biodiversity at the Spectrum of Life in the American Museum of Natural History, one idea keeps coming up again and again: classification. At its core, taxonomy is the science of naming and classifying organisms. While scientific names can seem complicated, they serve an important purpose. They allow scientists around the world to communicate the same organisms and place them within a broader framework of knowledge. While researching this project, I started noticing that classification appears everywhere in the museum. It's in the labels attached to specimens, the exhibit displays, the evolutionary diagrams, and even in the scientific papers produced by the museum researchers. Once I started paying attention to it, I realized that classification isn't just a tool used by scientists. It's one of the systems that holds the entire museum and the world together. But modern classification is more about simply grouping organisms that look alike. Increasingly, scientists pay attention to phylogeny, the study of evolutionary relationships, to understand how different species are connected through time. Classification is no longer just about appearance. It's about ancestry, common descent, and the shared history of life on Earth. Here are some examples. To me is how sirenians, hyraxes, and elephants are so closely related, despite the fact that they look so incredibly different. I am right in front of the infamous blue whale of the American Museum of Natural History. If you guys can see it, there it is. But something that is so interesting to me about cetaceans is that they are so closely related to other hoofed mammals. And here's my favorite exhibit, the sperm whale and giant squid, another just cetacean here. Behind me is a display about prehistoric mammals, so synapsid, and as you can see, this tree right here, they're all classified based on different parts that they evolved over time. So here we have placenta, this one is 3 middle ear bones, and more. Guys just liar because they only had their skeleton. Classification's so important to us anyway. At first glance, primates seem incredibly different from one another. A lemur, a gorilla, an orangutan, and a human occupy very different environments and lifestyles, yet phylogenetic studies reveal that these species are connected through shared ancestry. For spending some time looking at the taxonomy and the phylogeny, it gets you wondering why we classify things or ourselves in the first place. So here is one of the defining characteristics of being a human: tool use. But something that isn't as well known is that tons of other animals use tools as well, like octopi, which is kind of revolutionary because they have decentralized nervous systems, tons of cetaceans like dolphins, porpoises, and whales, as well as our fellow primates. Categorized as a tool for complexity, but when does that classification become judgment over actual science? Are presented as separate from nature. Instead, we're part of a much greater evolutionary history. As you can see above me, we have a bunch of primates, apes, gibbons, and other types of monkeys, but we only classify into the big apes, and even more specifically, hominins. So hard to classify humans. So scientists have to decide what similarities and what differences are significant enough to differentiate us from one another. The museum actually has a section on social Darwinism, social racism, and eugenics, so it's right over here. Right over here is a display of the questions about race, how these activities identify us and make us different from one another. So right here you can see considering race, different activities, and also displays about racism and science, and how the museum has displayed these changes in ideology over time. Because museums are essentially a sort of artifact in themselves that display the way our ideas have changed over time. In the 1900s, there was even an event here at the museum that promoted racist ideologies, and it was actually promoted by the previous museum's president at the time. I ended up having a wonderful conversation with museum staff about hominins and how social Darwinism has evolved over time.
We are volunteers at the Hall of Human Origins here at the American Museum of Natural History. We do not speak for the museum, this is our own words, but on the topic of social Darwinism and taxonomy and all of that.
A really fun place to start is how we've historically classified a lot of the great apes. So prior to now, we've had groupings of Congidae, which is orangutans, gorillas, and chimpanzees, and then humans. That's a way to separate humans from the rest of the great apes and kind of elevate us.
I think that overall what I got from this wonderful interview and conversation is essentially this. So one of the most interesting ideas discussed in my interview involved competing theories about human origins, and historically some scientists supported versions of what became known as multi-regional evolution, the idea that modern populations evolved from earlier human groups in different regions of the world. And while scientific discussions of human evolution were often complex, some interpretations of these ideas were used to argue that certain populations had evolved further than others, reinforcing existing racial hierarchies. Today, evidence, genetic, comparative genomics, archaeological, all suggest that the out of Africa theory is most accurate, and that is that we have a relatively common ancestor that lived in Africa, and then that species of hominin reproduced and over time dispersed gradually across the globe, and that is the most accepted theory today. And when you compare that to the other theory, the other theory is really almost an excuse for social racism. So to understand relationships, we have taxonomy, which helps scientists organize biodiversity, phylogeny, which helps explain evolutionary history, and lastly, human origins research helps us understand where we come from. But that research can also be misused. During the 19th and 20th centuries, some people, intellectuals mainly, attempted to classify human populations into hierarchies using science to justify unequal treatment and discrimination. And rather than asking how people were related, they asked supposedly who was superior, and all of these scientific constructs over time became indefinitely influenced by culture and us as humans. So what can we conclude? Why is classification so important? It's not just a collection of facts or labels or ontology. It's an accurate overview of our ideas and how we tend to think. The human process shaped by curiosity, evidence, debate, and the cultural context in which it's developed. And it's human nature to seek it.